They laughed at the new trauma doctor the moment she walked in, until a Navy SEAL general fighting for his life whispered her call sign, and the entire hospital realized the quiet woman they'd mocked was the only reason he was still breathing. The sliding glass doors of Jefferson Memorial Medical Center parted with a soft hydraulic sigh, letting in the sharp salt air of San Diego Harbor along with Dr. Elena Ramirez, who paused just long enough to take in the polished marble lobby, the framed photos of decorated service members, and the cluster of residents pretending not to stare at her petite frame and unassuming canvas messenger back. She didn't look like the kind of surgeon who ran a trauma bay in a military hospital, and Dr. Malcolm Wainwright, the towering, silver-haired chief of trauma surgery, made that clear within minutes of her arrival, flipping through her personnel file in his mahogany office with a frown that deepened at the sight of several blacked-out sections. 3 years unaccounted for, he muttered, tapping the redacted lines. No peer-reviewed publications. No teaching fellowship. And you expect me to hand you my trauma floor? Elena stood straight, hands folded behind her back, her voice calm. I expect to do my job, sir. He gave a humorless laugh. You'll observe until I decide you're competent. You will not lead procedures, you will not override my decisions, and you will certainly not freelance. This is not a rural clinic. She nodded once. Understood. By mid-morning the gossip had spread from the nurse's station to the radiology suite. She was a diversity hire, a charity case, someone's political placement. 2 nurses in the break room didn't bother lowering their voices as she poured burnt coffee into a paper cup. She looks like she belongs in pediatrics, one said. Wainwright's going to eat her alive. Elena didn't respond. She'd heard worse shouted over rotor blades and gunfire, and the sting of condescension barely registered compared to the memory of compressing an artery in the dark while dust and debris rained down from an explosion. At 14:17 hours the emergency radio crackled, snapping the ER from routine to chaos in seconds. Multi-vehicle collision involving a Navy convoy on Interstate 5. Multiple critical injuries inbound. ETA 3 minutes. And the trauma bays lit up in sterile white glare as gurneys rolled into place and surgical trays were ripped open. Wainwright took command, barking assignments with theatrical authority. I'll handle Bay 1. Miller, Bay 2. Ramirez, triage support. Stay out of the way. The first patient through the doors was a 23-year-old sailor with blunt chest trauma, hypotensive and cyanotic, his breathing shallow and uneven. Wainwright jammed a laryngoscope into the young man's mouth, frustration mounting as blood obscured his view. I can't see the cords, he snapped. Prep for a cricothyrotomy. The monitor screamed as oxygen saturation plummeted. Elena, standing at the threshold, saw what he didn't. Distended neck veins, tracheal deviation, asymmetrical chest rise. Sir, she said evenly, it's a tension pneumothorax. He shot her a glare. I didn't ask for commentary. The heart rate dropped further. Nurses exchanged panicked looks. He's crashing, someone yelled. Wainwright froze for a split second, scalpel poised, calculating his next move as seconds bled away. Elena stepped forward. Needle decompression, she said, already reaching for a 14-gauge angiocath. Without waiting for permission, she located the second intercostal space and drove the needle in with precise force. A sharp hiss filled the room as trapped air escaped, followed by the sweetest sound in medicine, the steady beep of a returning heartbeat. Oxygen saturation climbed. The sailor gasped. Silence swallowed the bay. Wainwright's face flushed crimson. You disobeyed a direct order, he said through clenched teeth. You were suspended pending review. Elena removed her gloves, her expression unchanged. He's stable, she replied softly. She walked out of the trauma bay under a haze of stunned stares, her suspension hanging in the air like the smell of antiseptic, and was halfway down the corridor when the overhead speakers crackled with a code rarely heard at Jefferson Memorial. Code black. Helipad. VIP inbound. The charge nurse's eyes widened. Code black meant classified, high command, federal lockdown. Wainwright stormed from the trauma bay, momentarily forgetting Elena in the rush of importance. Who is it? He demanded. General Marcus Steele. The hospital director answered breathlessly. Internal bleeding. They insisted on bringing him here. The name hit Elena like a shockwave. 4 years ago, in a valley half a world away, she had crawled through smoke and gunfire to reach a wounded brigadier general pinned beneath twisted metal, performing emergency surgery with minimal supplies while enemy rounds struck dirt inches from her hands. She had left a fragment of shrapnel near his thoracic aorta, because removing it in the field would have killed him, and before he lost consciousness he had gripped her sleeve and called her by a name few outside special operations knew. Valkyrie. On the rooftop now, the thundering rotor washed battered scrubs and tempers alike as the helicopter doors slid open and a stretcher emerged bearing a pale, intubated Marcus Steele, his blood pressure collapsing despite transfusions in flight. Wainwright began issuing orders for imaging, insisting on a CT scan to locate the source of bleeding. But a Navy captain locked eyes with Elena as she stepped from the stairwell shadows, and recognition dawned. "Major Ramirez?" he breathed. "It's Dr. Ramirez," she corrected quietly. "He has an aortoesophageal fistula," she said, scanning the monitors. "Old shrapnel near the descending aorta. It's rupturing into his esophagus." Wainwright scoffed. "That's speculation." The captain's jaw tightened. "She's taking lead." And just like that, the woman they dismissed as fragile and inexperienced walked toward the stretcher of the most powerful patient the hospital had ever received, the weight of suspension, protocol, and pride falling away beneath something far more unyielding. Experience earned where hesitation meant death. They mocked the new trauma doctor the moment she walked through the doors, until a dying Navy SEAL general whispered her call sign, and the entire hospital realized the quiet woman they'd dismissed was the only one who could save him. When Dr. Elena Ramirez arrived at Jefferson Memorial Medical Center in San Diego, she didn't look like a battlefield surgeon. Small frame, calm voice, no dramatic entrance. And Chief of Trauma Surgery Dr. Malcolm Wainwright made his doubts clear as he flipped through her file, pausing at 3 heavily redacted years. "You'll observe," he said coldly. "You will not lead, you will not improvise, and you will not contradict me." Elena simply nodded. By mid-morning the whispers had spread. Nurses speculated she was a political placement, a fragile hire who wouldn't survive Wainwright's temper, and she heard every word while stirring bitter coffee in the break room, her expression unreadable, her silence mistaken for weakness. The illusion shattered at 14:16 hours when a multi-vehicle collision involving a Navy convoy sent multiple critical casualties rushing into the trauma bays. Wainwright took command loudly, assigning Elena to triage and ordering her to stay out of his way. But when a young sailor with severe chest trauma began crashing on the table and Wainwright struggled with the airway, Elena saw what he didn't: distended neck veins, tracheal deviation, uneven chest rise. "Tension pneumothorax," she said evenly. He snapped at her to be quiet. Seconds later the monitor flatlined. Without asking permission, Elena grabbed a 14-gauge needle, located the second intercostal space, and drove it in. A sharp hiss filled the room as trapped air escaped. The heart rhythm returned, oxygen levels climbed, and the sailor gasped back to life. The room fell silent. Wainwright's face darkened with fury. "You're suspended," he said through clenched teeth. Elena removed her gloves calmly. "He's stable," she replied, and walked out. She had nearly reached the locker room when the overhead speakers crackled with a rare command. Code black. "Helipad. VIP inbound." The hospital shifted instantly into lockdown mode. "Who is it?" Wainwright demanded. "General Marcus Steele," the director answered. Massive internal bleeding. The name hit Elena like a shockwave. For years earlier she had operated on that same man in a combat zone after an explosion tore through his convoy, leaving behind a fragment of shrapnel near his thoracic aorta, because removing it in the field would have killed him, and before losing consciousness he had gripped her sleeve and called her Valkyrie. Now, as the helicopter thundered onto the roof and the stretcher rolled out bearing a pale, intubated Steele, Wainwright insisted on a CT scan before surgery, unwilling to act without imaging. But a Navy captain locked eyes with Elena and recognition dawned. "Major Ramirez," he breathed. "Dr. Ramirez," she corrected softly, stepping forward despite her suspension. She studied the monitors and the subtle swelling along Steele's upper chest. "It's an aortoesophageal fistula," she said. "The old shrapnel has ruptured through." Wainwright scoffed, dismissing her diagnosis as speculation, but the captain's voice cut through the wind and chaos. "She's taking lead." And for the first time since she arrived, the staff who had whispered about her weakness watched in stunned silence as the quiet doctor they had underestimated stepped toward the most critical patient of their careers with absolute calm. A kind of certainty that doesn't come from textbooks, but from battlefields where hesitation costs lives. They thought it would be easy to fire her, until the doors opened and a 4-star SEAL general wheeled himself in to set the record straight. 3 days after General Marcus Steele's surgery, the executive board of Jefferson Memorial Medical Center convened an emergency review at Dr. Malcolm Wainwright's insistence, and he stood at the head of the polished table arguing that Dr. Elena Ramirez was reckless, insubordinate, and a liability who had overridden protocol, commandeered an operating room, and risked the hospital's federal standing with what he called unsanctioned surgical aggression. Elena stood quietly at the far end in a simple gray suit, hands clasped behind her back, offering no dramatic defense beyond, "I did what was necessary to save him," which only seemed to frustrate Wainwright more as several board members murmured about liability and governance. And just as the chairman cleared his throat to call for a termination vote, the double doors swung open and conversation died mid-breath. A Navy aide entered first, followed by a wheelchair pushed steadily into the room, and seated in it, pale but upright, furline tucked discreetly beneath his jacket, was General Marcus Steele. Every person stood instinctively. "Sit," he ordered hoarsely, and they obeyed. His sharp gaze settled first on Elena, then shifted to Wainwright. "I was awake long enough on that table to hear you argue against her," Steele said evenly. "If she had followed your protocol, I would be dead." The words hit harder than any legal argument. He turned to the board. 4 years ago, she operated on me in a combat zone after an explosion tore through my convoy. She left a fragment near my aorta because removing it would have killed me in the field. She told me if it ever shifted, it would be catastrophic." He paused, letting the silence stretch. 3 days ago, it shifted. She knew exactly what to do because she was there when it happened. Wainwright tried to interject, but Steele raised a hand. "You call her reckless. In special operations, we call her legend." The chairman visibly paled. Steele continued, voice firm despite fatigue. "Dr. Elena Ramirez is a decorated combat surgeon attached to Naval Special Warfare. She has medals most of you have only seen in photographs. If you terminate her, I will personally ensure this hospital loses every Department of Defense contract it holds." The threat was calm, direct, and entirely believable. The board didn't need time to deliberate. "There will be no termination," the chairman said quickly. "Effective immediately, Dr. Ramirez will assume the role of Chief of Trauma Surgery." Wainwright's face drained of color as the room shifted around him. Within hours his nameplate was gone, his office reassigned. Elena declined the corner suite and instead converted it into a family waiting room, choosing a smaller office near the trauma floor with the door left open. And over the next weeks the department changed. Less shouting, more teaching, sharper preparation, quieter confidence. On the day of his discharge, General Steele returned in civilian clothes and stopped at the nurse's station where Elena reviewed charts. "Pentagon keeps asking when you're coming back," he said softly. She glanced around at the residents and nurses moving with steady focus. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied. Steele nodded once, then straightened despite the healing scar beneath his jacket and raised his hand in a crisp salute directed at her. Every service member in the lobby snapped to attention, and after a brief pause, Elena returned it. The general held the salute for a long second before lowering his hand and walking into the sunlight, and from that day forward no one at Jefferson Memorial ever mocked the quiet trauma doctor again. They simply said, with unmistakable respect, "The legend's on shift."